Steelers fans, Mitchell Trubisky is probably going to be your starting quarterback next year. I know that's a lot to grapple with. I know that's something you have to come to terms with, and some people are struggling with this. Even though we talked about this a lot in this show, we're going to talk a little bit more about it because I got Wes Euler on today. No Tony Serino. We'll explain why in a little bit here. He's off somewhere celebrating while he's on vacation. But there's a lot to talk about because the first day of free agency is done, and the Steelers have at least made a few moves addressing the offensive line with 2 signings, one re-signing, one bringing in a new player. We'll talk about those signings and what Mitch Trubisky being signed means for how they're building this team moving forward. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button. And if you want to get more of our stuff, hit the download button or the subscribe button, on YouTube to get all of our content daily, Monday through Friday. And sometimes on the weekend, sometimes you get our extra episodes like our Mitchell Trubisky update that we posted as soon as that happened. Joining me today is Wes Euler of Steeler Nation Radio and the Ears and Beers podcast. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Wes, how you doing?
Chris, I'm happy we finally made it. It's been months. It's felt like years. It's been months of quarterback speculation from Rodgers to Wilson, Willis or Pickett. I'm just happy we finally crossed the finish line.
Right. And it's just like now we get to finally like talk about these things as if they're not conjecture for the longest part. But the Steelers signing Trubisky, Mitch Trubisky, of course, this was talked about for a while. A lot of people, speculated as to the potential of it and what could happen there. I thought about this for a while. Tony Serino called this out almost immediately after the.
I feel bad
for
Tony that he's not on today. This is like this would be his victory lap.
This is on him. He texted me Friday and he was just like, "Hey man, I'm gonna be on vacation, so like I can't be on the show next week. But like if Trubisky gets signed, like I want someone to do my victory lap for me. So we're doing that,
Tony.
Yeah. Wes is gonna take your place here. He's taking the victory lap for you calling Mitch Trubisky as your guy. The Trubisky train has pulled into Pittsburgh officially. Hashtag Trubisky train. But Wes, there's a lot of people who are frustrated, a lot of people who are confused, but some people who are just like, yeah, this sounds about right, which is what you and I have been talking about, them getting a veteran quarterback of this level. Maybe not necessarily Trubisky himself, but at least a veteran quarterback of this level to address their quarterback needs for now so that they can address other positions and get quarterback maybe next year or the year after. What were your thoughts as soon as you saw this?
As soon as I saw this, right, with this news coming out so early in the day and in the process like it did, my first thought was, okay, this has clearly been in the works for a while. Because, yes, I know the legal tampering period just started on Monday, but we're all not naive enough to know how this works. It feels like Mitch Trubisky is a guy that they have zeroed in on now throughout this process. Because, again, if it was truly – we're going to test the waters. We're going to talk to a couple different people. We're going to see what the pricing looks like. I don't think it would have happened this quick. I think it's pretty clear, too, from some of the reports from Jeremy Fowler, our old buddy here in Pittsburgh, who's now Mr. National with ESPN, that for Trubisky's camp, it was always follow Brian Daboll to the Giants and compete with Daniel Jones, or go to Pittsburgh and compete with Mason Rudolph, and that he wanted to go where he thought he had the best chance to start games and to get on the field. And it was down to those two teams. That makes it seem to me like, Chris, like the Steelers had kind of, again, zeroed in on this, that this was something that they had been working on, something that they had done their homework on, and was kind of at the top of their priority list to get Mitch Trubisky locked down. That was my initial reaction, because, again, it wouldn't have happened this quick if they were going to do the speed dating thing and really consider a couple options and maybe, all right, we'll swipe right on these 3 and then let's have a couple conversations and see what happens here. For whatever reason, for better or for worse, you love it, you hate it, feels like this was the guy that they've kind of had in their back pocket and hope worked out this entire time. And on day one, they seemingly get it done.
That could be it. And here's the thing here is that people need to understand there's a difference between thinking he's good for now and for what they need at this point in time and thinking he's going to be the guy for the long term. Because I think that's where a lot of Steelers fans are panicking. They're like, oh no, like I'm going to have to spend the next 8 to 10 years watching Mitch Trubisky be the Steelers quarterback. You're doomed. I don't want to do that. But I'll tell you this. I don't think that's at all the plans here. They went with a guy who has had success on a winning football team, with the Bears. When I believe he had 11 wins in 2018, I think it was. In his second year in the NFL, they went to
twice.
Made the playoffs twice. They went 12-4 one of those years. And it was on a team that was defensively led and was strong in their ground game. And it didn't force him to have to do too much. And what you basically asked of him was, hey, if things break down, use your legs, get a first down, or buy time and throw the deep ball. Hey, go to your first read, go to your second read. Don't try to be cute. And I think that's who they got here, Mitch Trubisky. And I was going back over more of his tape after we looked at it, and I actually wrote about him and his tape for Carter's Classroom for DK Pittsburgh Sports, to go check that out right now. I look at these things and like, hey, these are the basic things they want. Just someone who's capable of throwing on the run, capable of being mobile, has an arm to get the ball down the field. That's all they need out of the quarterback this year. Don't make the big mistake. That's something they do got to pull out of his game, because he did make quite a few of those over his career. Mm-hmm. But I think that's far enough of what you need out of a quarterback. And I also don't think this precludes the Steelers from drafting a quarterback. Maybe Malik Willis. I think it precludes them from drafting Kenny Pickett, because Kenny Pickett to me is I thought he could be better than a Mason Rudolph, but he feels like to me along the lines of Mitch Trubisky and Mason Rudolph, whereas he can come in, know your offense.
He doesn't need to sit for a year.
Exactly. And that's not what you're bringing him in to do. Malik Willis might need to sit for a year, and his talent, his ceiling is so much higher. So I don't think it precludes them from drafting Malik Willis. I do think, though, if Malik Willis goes, it definitely means they're going, best player available in the position skill and the skill players at 20.
Yeah, Chris, we've seen the Steelers do these types of moves before where, we kind of know what the positions of need are heading into free agency and before the draft. They sign somebody, but then that doesn't necessarily stop them from going that direction early in the draft, with a first, a second, a third round pick either. We've seen that. That's how they like to operate. That's how they like to do business. They don't want to pigeonhole themselves. They want to leave everything on the table. And I think you're right. Would I be a little surprised if the Steelers ended up taking a quarterback at 20 now? Yeah, sure. At least more surprised than I would have been if we would have been having this conversation a couple of days ago. But it looks like they didn't have to pay a huge price tag, pay a big ransom, something in the high teens for Mitch Trubisky. And so that does still give you flexibility there. If Malik Willis falls to you at 20 and you think he's got this great ceiling, and you know what, we can have the competition with Mason and Mitch this year, and we can let Malik sit a year and learn and all those different things, that's still a real possibility. But I think more realistically, like we talked about, it gives you now a year where you have a guy who can win, where you can continue to try and revamp and retool the offense. And then maybe if there's someone you're in love with in the draft next year, then you can go and get that guy. And again, you're still not paying a ransom to Mitch Trubisky. Worst case scenario, he's a slightly overpaid, very good backup, for whoever the next guy is. But it gives you options. I know it's not Aaron Rodgers. I know it's not Deshaun Watson. I know it's not Russell Wilson, but it gives you options. And it, of course, too, you didn't want to, no matter what you think of Mitch Trubisky, I think we can all agree, you didn't want to go into training camp with Mason Rudolph and a rookie.
Yeah.
Because then it would kind of feel like you mentioned, unless it was like Kenny Pickett, it would feel like it was Mason Rudolph's job and the other guy was just kind of there, to be the sparring partner and get some snaps but really just learn along the way. This, at least you'll have a legitimate quarterback competition. And here's the other thing too. I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast, watch us on YouTube. I read the comments. All right. I know you guys don't like Matt Canada. I know for the majority of you, there's not a lot of faith in Matt Canada. Well, guess what? Come January of 2023, I don't think we're going to have any questions left about Matt Canada. It's either going to be he finally got a quarterback who can do what he wants to do in his offense, and look at how much better it was, or it's going to be, man, Mitch Trubisky stunk again, the offense stunk again, and Matt Canada is clearly not the guy. That, I think, is another at least thing that you can take from this, that yo, Matt Canada, it's time to put up or it's time to see you later. Because as you mentioned, you did get a guy, and I don't want to make it seem like Mitch Trubisky is the perfect prototype,
Right.
but he fits the mold of what a Matt Canada quarterback should be, or wants his quarterbacks to be. At the end of this season, hopefully you're going to know a lot more about your offense and what it looks like under Matt Canada, and if you want to stay in that direction. And again, you're not going to have handcuffed yourself to a bunch of money or a bunch of draft picks, and you'll still be able to go in whichever direction you want to.
Absolutely. I agree with that. But I want to talk a little bit more about that and how it fits into what Matt Canada wants to do on offense. We'll do that in a sec. But first, I got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. It's that time of the year again where March Madness is upon us. Bracketology's done, so that means you get to make your picks. There's one place that you want to place your money down, and that's betonline.net. From the latest odds, contests, player props, betonline.net is the #1 sports source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today to use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action at betonline.net, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Euler of Steeler Nation Radio. We're continuing to talk about the Steelers' first day in free agency with the tampering period and everything. Now, finishing up on Trubisky, a lot of this does rest on, what can be done with Matt Canada's offense. And Mason Rudolph was on radio last week or 2 weeks ago, however long it was, saying, we didn't do all of the offense because, we had to kind of limit it with what Ben could do. Now you're bringing in a quarterback who can move. And Mason Rudolph, he's not, I don't think he has Trubisky's mobility, but he's another guy who's not a statue like Ben Roethlisberger was. This is the opportunity for Matt Canada to show, hey, my style of offense can work. And maybe this was the plan all along. The Steelers knew, hey, there's going to be a year where we're not going to be able to go get the quarterback of our dreams and the quarterback of our future. So let's have a year where we experiment with this offense and we get to see, if something does click with Matt Canada, because, he there's times that people have said, oh man, he does some really cool things, but he needs to flesh this out a little bit more. This will give you yet 1 year to kind of experiment with Ben. Now you have a year to experiment with younger quarterbacks who will be more mobile, have a better arm or have a stronger arm who can get the ball down the field. And now you're able to say, okay, what things of this are working? And if, like you said, if things are working, great. You figure what it is. You keep Matt Canada around. You see what you want to do with that. If things aren't working, well, you tried that. Now you see you get it. Yeah, he's out of here. But in all seriousness, it gives you a chance to kind of evaluate, what you're doing there. And then again, whoever you want your quarterback to be the next year, you can build around that person or get someone that person likes. And if that's a veteran that you're bringing in from free agency, a veteran that you're getting on the trade market, a rookie that you're bringing in the draft, you can get someone that's saying, hey, I want you to do this specific thing with this quarterback, and we're going to build around that for the next 10, 15, 20 years, however long you got your quarterback. But Wes, I think the biggest challenge right now is getting Mitchell Trubisky to be able to get back to the point where he's not having to make a whole bunch of complicated reads, deciphering, hey, are they in cover 2, cover 3, cover 4? Is this the switch off? You don't want to call plays like Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger would come to the line. He'd have three or four different options. He'd switch them because he was so experienced and so good at understanding these are the things that we need to do against these different coverages. You want to give Mitchell Trubisky 1 or 2 reads and say, hey, you're basing it off of these things that throwing around the field. If they're not there, throw it away. Buy us, live to fight another day. Yep. But we're basing this offensive off of Najee Harris and this offensive line.
I think there can be some similarities of the 2018-19 or maybe 2018-19.
Yes.
The Rams team that lost to Tom Brady and the Patriots in the Super Bowl. The way that offense was run with Jared Goff, it was very. I mean, Sean McVay was like the parrot sitting on Jared Goff's shoulder, whispering, don't look over there, don't go with that fan. Like it was, you could tell watching that it was very much, okay, Jared, here's what we're going to do. Here's option 1. Here's option 2. If it's not there, throw it away. And we're going to run the ball with Todd Gurley a lot, and we're going to move it that way, and we're going to play good defense, right? Like the Rams of 2018-19 were very different than the Rams that won the Super Bowl this past year.
Absolutely.
And that was a lot of which, not entirely, but a lot of that was because of Jared Goff's limitations and because they just had the ability to run the football very, very well with their offensive line and with Todd Gurley for most of that season. That, I think, is kind of same church, different pew is what you want to do with Mitch Trubisky. Now, Canada's offense is different than Sean McVay's offense. That's not the parallels that I'm drawing here. But I think you get what I'm saying in the sense of you don't want him to you don't want to send Mitch Trubisky to the buffet, right? Like you want to sit down with the set menu and it's like, all right, here's your appetizer, here's your entree, here's your dessert. Please choose wine or beer. Like you don't want to give him the buffet line of options. You want to keep it simple. You want to keep it short and sophisticated. And here's maybe another parallel you could draw. You want to be able to lean on that run game. Obviously, we've all talked about this ad nauseum. The run game has needed to improve for a few years now. You hope Najee takes that second step that he showed a lot of flashes of being the guy this season. If the offensive line gets a little bit better, all of a sudden you can run the football more effectively. That opens up a lot of things that you can do as well too. But these are now the questions that we know for sure that we're going to speculate and talk about all the way, through the spring and summer and into training camp and into the preseason, because I do find it funny, Chris. I mentioned how I read the comments here on YouTube. All right. I'm part of the Locked On Steelers Facebook group. I see everything that's being said in there. There's a lot of the same people that don't have faith in Matt Canada. A lot of the same people who've been saying, Matt Canada's not it. I can't believe they brought him back for another year. You got to get a real offensive coordinator. You got to get somebody with some gravitas, somebody with some chops as your offensive coordinator. Those same people, a lot of them are now saying, Mitch Trubisky just stunk because of Matt Nagy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, if you think Mitch Trubisky just stunk because of Matt Nagy and the Bears, and you don't have faith in Matt Canada and what he's going to do with the Steelers offense, I would say it's probably hard for you, at least realistically, to find some optimism in this, if you're being honest, because you can't tell me that you don't believe in Matt Canada, but that the only reason that Mitch Trubisky didn't work out in Chicago was because of the coaching staff. Right. So that's what we know now. And I think it's good in this sense of you get this done, you get this moving now right away. I mean, hopefully tonight, Mitch Trubisky is studying Matt Canada offense. Mitch Trubisky is starting that process already, as opposed to, to wait another 6 weeks for the NFL draft, another month and a half, and it's the end of April, and then all of a sudden it's early May before you've got one of these rookies who's trying to pick this thing up. Maybe it's that similar timeline, and you traded for somebody, right? Now that guy's, if it was Jimmy G, right? Jimmy G's coming off a shoulder surgery. He probably can't throw till July. All of a sudden he's behind the 8 ball in terms of trying to learn the offense. At least now, it seems like, again, Mitch, it was clearly the Giants or the Steelers. He wanted to be here. He wanted to be in this organization with stability. He's got time now. You hit the playbook. You get after all this stuff so that hopefully you can have him up to speed and you can be running this offense. The Death Star can be fully operational, early in the season, and it's not still week 5, 6, 7, and you're trying to figure this out.
No, I agree with that. And another thing, like you said, with Jimmy Garoppolo, you'd have to trade to get him, and they lose no trade value in signing this guy. That to me is one of the biggest differences. Is like I think I'm fine with the Steelers. I think it's smart even to not to go get a guy that you don't have to pay a lot to do, but. And not, you don't have to get the superstar now, but if you had been trading to get the guy, I think you're losing draft capital that you desperately need to build this roster. Now, part of the roster they need to build is the offensive line. They make 2 moves on Monday to basically figure out who's going to be on this offensive line next season. Chukwuma Okorafor being the biggest signing, of course, bringing him back, the offensive tackle who had 4 years with the Steelers, 3 years. $29.5 million. I believe Schefter said 20.5 of that will be due in the first 2 years. We still don't have the full details of this contract. There's a lot of Steelers fans poo-pooing this deal, Wes, but I look and I see a guy who's still massive at 24 years old, who's a good pass protector, does need to improve his run blocking, does need to get more nastier and more detailed in his run blocking. I think that I get their want to keep him and that they offered him something less and then other teams came in and kind of raised it up. Mm-hmm. I get wanting to keep him and saying, hey, we'll bring him back, because a lot of people said, he was a part of the reason the offense was lost in the line was so bad last year. I'm like, I disagree. I thought he was actually one of the more level guys on the offensive line. Yes. He just wasn't the spark plug that could fix everybody else. And that's why I think people are frustrated. I'm like, listen, he's a good player. And when you have a good offensive lineman at that age and at that size, you do pay them a good bunch. The question is, though, could they have gotten someone else who would have been that spark plug for that price? And I think that's where Steelers fans are a little frustrated about right now.
No, believe me, I totally get it. It's a big number, but it's a big number. Listen, there's no way to sugarcoat that. It would make him, I think, the 9th highest paid right tackle in the. I was trying to do the quick math on this before you and I recorded. Let's say he's going to be one of the high, if it's not exactly 9th or 10th. Let's say top 12, I think, according to my math. And as Chris points out from time to time, I went to WVU, so take that with a grain of salt. I also went to media school at WVU, so I wasn't doing much math, but about a top 10, top 12 paid right tackle, you might just look at that on the surface and say, no way, no chance. That's not worth the value. But I would encourage you to dig a little bit deeper in that, in the sense of, here's what I mean. It's a position that almost everybody in the league needs. You know, tackles have almost become one step below quarterbacks in that regard. Like we all know, everyone needs a quarterback. After that, for most teams, the list is, the teams that don't have franchise quarterbacks and are still looking for that guy, the list is offensive tackle, cornerback.
Right.
Like those are the premium positions where there's just only so many of those guys. There's less franchise caliber guys at those positions than there are teams in the NFL. This is something, you work with Dale Lally, I work with Dale Lally, Matt Williamson, his colleague on SNR. They talk about this all the time, how like they don't think there's ever been a big of disparity in the NFL between the pass rushers and the tackles, like the edge guys and the offensive tackles, than there is right now. Like there are so many good edge rushers in the NFL. There's only a handful of good tackles. And so I think this is one of those, it's better to dance with the devil type scenarios. Chuks has been in the offense. Chuks is homegrown. Chuks is, as you mentioned, only 24 years old, which is still really young for this position. I mean, we just saw, I'll use another Rams reference here. Andrew Whitworth, I know he's playing the other side of the offensive line, but he's 40 and is playing offensive tackle at a very high level. We saw Joe Thomas with the Browns play at a very high level into his late 30s. It is a position that a lot of times you got to fill out physically. You got to mature. You got to learn so much on the fly. And as you mentioned, it's not like he had David DeCastro next to him. There was a lot of moving parts on that offensive line. So believe me, I did the same thing. I saw the Schefter tweet. I looked and I said, they paid him how much?
How much?
But now that I've had some more time to think about it, listen, again, I still don't love the term, but that's you either had to pay Chuks that kind of money, or you had to draft a tackle 20th overall, because that's the only way. If you would have gone into free agency and you want somebody better than Chuks, well, you're going to have to pay a lot more than Chuks. If you want somebody on the same level as Chuks, at best, you're going to get a similar deal. But again, for a guy who's going to have to come in fresh and learn the offense and doesn't already know all the things that Chuks knows within the organization, again, I don't love the number on it, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast at the tackle position. Those guys make decent money, particularly on their second contracts. You have to pay somebody there. And we've talked about this too, right? The Steelers have the money. The Steelers have cap space. You load it up in the first 2 years with the guaranteed money. If he ends up not being the guy, you can cut bait with him and it's not going to cost you. It's not going to be a huge hit against your cap. You didn't want to add another substantial item to your list of needs. And if you would have tried to replace right tackle, that's a very substantial item. I think that this is an okay move. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I think that this is an okay move.
And that's the thing, is I don't think that this is the move that fixes anything by any means, because of course you're bringing back a guy, but it's a guy who can at least keep stability at a position that wasn't the problem last year, because they need stability in the offensive line, but offensive line wasn't a killer position. Offensive tackle, wasn't a killer position at right tackle. The Steelers' problems came from the center just not being able to keep it together. Yeah, I mean, and really the three interior offensive line positions. Kendrick Green could not communicate, could not keep everything together, and was undersized and just outmanned at center. He was just not in the right space of mind. Trey Turner was a late add because they lost David DeCastro unexpectedly for the season, and they brought him in, and he did what he could, but he obviously, there was a reason he was still around when they did sign him, and you saw just he didn't fit in very well as either. And then Kevin Dotson, who at times looked good, got injured, wasn't able to get back. You ended up having to start John LeGlue half the season. Like you had all those problems at left guard. So really, and Dan Moore Jr., a lot of people kind of look back and said, you know what, that wasn't that bad for a 4th-round draft pick rookie. You can live with that over there. So I think the offensive tackles positions are fine. They need to see what they're doing with the interior. They need to see what they're doing at center. And they added a guy who plays center but might play a little bit of guard in Mason Cole. We're going to talk about that in a minute here because I think that's really important. But first, we got to talk about our great sponsors at rockauto.com. Save time and money when you visit rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership when you need your car fixed? For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump can cost up to $353 from a chain store, but if you get it from rockauto.com right now, it's $216. Rock Auto is a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything that you can need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil and even new carpet for your car or truck. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find your solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com today, and if you get there, you see all the parts that are available for your car or truck. When you do see your part and you're placing your order, put right Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so that they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Wes Euler. We're talking Steelers football, and after their first day of free agency, or first period of the tampering period, where everything's moving around. Now, we're recording this in the evening. We gave it some time. Normally, we try to record early in the day, but we wanted to give time to see what would happen. It's a good thing we did. Now, the Steelers, after getting Trubisky and after getting Okorafor locked up, they looked. You're looking at their other moves. They made one other move that was public, was Mason Cole. Now, Mason Cole is a 5th-year center. He played center for the Vikings this past year. Actually had a really good game against the Steelers when you look back at it, but then how many centers had good games against the Steelers run defense? I was talking to Luke Braun about this, our Locked On Vikings host, and he brought up a point that I think everyone's talking about, and I was even thinking about when I was looking at the tape. I was like, this guy's, his hands are a little bit slower. He's having some struggle snapping the ball. He might be a much better left guard. He's 6'5", so he has the length, he has the arms. They're going to be able to get out there. That's going to be something that Kendrick Green can't do. And now you say, okay, is this guy your right guard of the future? Is he basically your new BJ Finney / JC Hassenauer? Except,
right.
you're signing him to this veteran deal, and he's had some more starts under his belt. That's when I think they added in this guy. But Wes, first, what are your thoughts on the signing? And two, what does this say for the plans with this offensive line? Because everyone's thinking like, well, wait a second. That's not Ryan Jensen or Teron Armstead or Brandon Scherf. What? Come on, guys. What are we doing here?
No, it's not, Chris, but it's another one of these classic, you reinforce a position of need, you bring somebody in, but you don't procure yourself from going that way in the draft, right? I mean, we know that, you bring in one of those big money guys, and if you're sitting there at pick 20 in the first round and the best player available is at that same position, you're not going to take that guy. But when you make a move like this for Mason Cole, you still leave all options on the table. I think this is the more and more I knew that Mason Cole was the center of the Minnesota Vikings, okay, before today. Other than that, I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't know a ton about this guy, right? So I, like everybody, have been doing some reading, been doing some research. And the more I've found out, I've liked, because this is a guy with versatility. He played primarily tackle in college at Michigan. He's played primarily center in the NFL. But I don't know if you knew this, Chris. He played guard against the Steelers in that Thursday night football game this past season. And I had the numbers here. Here we go. In that game, the Steelers defense gave up over 240 yards rushing.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook ate them alive that night. That was rough.
6.7 yards per carry that the Steelers gave up in that game. So you think maybe his tape in that game against the Steelers, they saw something that they liked, and they said, now, wait a second. This guy's typically playing at center. He's playing at guard now, and look at how they're moving the pile against us. I think that there was definitely something in that performance, in that switch from center to guard, and I like how you referenced that there from Luke, from the Locked On Vikings, correct?
Yes.
Like, I definitely think there's some rhyme or reason to that because, again, he played right guard against the Steelers this season and had a lot of success in that short week on Thursday night doing so. Chris, he's still young. He's 26, but he's started 39 games in the NFL already in his career. He is, I wrote this down, played over 2,500 snaps already in his NFL career. And get this, you'll love this. In 4 years in the league, Mr. Carter, he's been flagged for penalties 9 times.
Yeah, I saw he got 0 penalties last year. I saw that. I was like, whoa.
In 4 years in the NFL on the offensive line, he's been flagged for false starting or for holding or for, illegal hands to the face, whatever, 9 times in 4 years. That's pretty darn good. That's just a little over an average of 2 penalties per season. I can do the math on that one. I think there's a lot to like with this guy. It's another one of those, low risk, high reward type moves for the Steelers. Worst case scenario, he comes in and he pushes Kendrick Green and he competes for a guard spot and it doesn't end up working out perfectly, right? Or maybe just other things work out for the Steelers. But then all of a sudden you've got that kind of ace in your deck of cards. You got the ace in the hole who can play center, who can play guard, who can stretch those helmets that you get on game day into larger numbers. That's another Mike Tomlin thing. Mike Tomlin talks about game day, we get 47 helmets, but we need those 47 guys to be able to play 52, 53 different roles. Like you need guys who aren't just guards. You need guys who aren't just slot corners. You need guys who can, if you need to, if you have some injuries in a game or whatever in a pinch, that you can move around, that you can be confident in. I think he checks all those boxes. Again, young, experienced, doesn't take penalties, had success in the one game at guard this year that the Vikings asked him to play, has a lot of experience at center, played primarily tackle in the Big Ten Conference at Michigan in college. I like this. I think that this could be one of those, not that he's going to come in here and be an all-pro.
Right, he doesn't fix the offensive line, but he's a piece that can help.
He's not going to come in here and be Marquise Pouncey. He's not going to come in here and be Quentin Nelson like he was for the Colts. But you know what? Last year, you didn't really have many B+ guys on the offensive line. And a lot of times, if you could get 4 or 5 B-level guys across the offensive line, buddy, in the NFL, that you could be cooking with fire if that's the case. I think that's one of these moves here. I think he is a solid 3.0 GPA. He's not going to get you on the honor roll, but he's certainly going to get you your degree, and he's certainly going to get you into a good school. I think he is the type of guy that every offensive line needs if you're going to build a successful, cohesive unit.
I agree, and you need to do that, and you need guys like you said, they're glue pieces. Maybe not the glue pieces, but bullet. I'm horrible. That was a terrible joke. I deserve a Yoshi pop for that. But point being, I really like the idea of his versatility. But this offensive line does need heavy hitters. Now, one thing that we know about the Steelers is, one, they like their versatile guys, but 2. Mike Tomlin talked about this season and kind of about Melvin Ingram and how they much prefer to grow those stars and those key players through the draft more oftentimes than not, because those guys then buy into what you have a lot easier. They help build something. They feel more part of it, and you can keep them along. It's a lot easier to keep them around in the future, and that's just how the Steelers have operated. Maybe the whole point here is that, look, we're getting guys who can be solid and fill in these positions. And so that we can get the guys that we really want in the draft upcoming here. This is why I said with these moves, at least these initial moves, and the Steelers aren't nowhere near done. They still got cap space. They still got things that they can do to create more cap space. Right. They can still sign other guys. And I want to get your thoughts on one in particular, or 2 in particular guys that they could bring back in just a second here. But I really think it's interesting because now you're really at best player available again in the first in the first round. Whereas, and they kind of were before, but this kind of solidifies it. Like, hey, if say Tom Brady doesn't come back and he signs and Ryan Jensen signs with the Steelers, you're not drafting Tyler Linderbaum at that point. Maybe you draft Zion Johnson, but center, it becomes a much murkier position. But with a signing by Mason Cole, you're not drafting Tyler Linderbaum if he's at 20 and if he's the best player on your board,
or Zion Johnson or whoever,
or Zion Johnson. And that's my thinking here, Wes, is that this allows them that flexibility to do that while still addressing other needs as well, because corner's still out there, linebackers still out there, and then star players on the defensive line like Devontae Wyatt and Jordan Davis are still out there. And if another phenomenal player just falls to you, like, you know what? we didn't see ourselves taking Jameson Williams or Chris Olave or whoever, but we can't pass up this guy who we think is a top 5 player in the NFL or in his draft class, and just somehow magically fell to us, like you've talked about how Cam Hayward did back in 2011. So I think
again, historically, that's where the Steelers want to be.
Yes.
You can love it, you can hate it, but that's what they're trying to accomplish. There's no sense in fighting that or arguing that. That's the way they do business.
It's been the Kevin Colbert way, and I know a lot of people are very upset at it. They're like, "Oh man!" And listen,
the disrespect for Kevin Colbert on social media
it's way too much.
Ridiculous.
And
it's ridiculous.
If you're one of those people who says this guy sucks, this guy stinks, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know football. You're pretending. You're just being mad on Twitter.
You're just playing Madden.
You're just playing Madden.
You don't know. You can trade all our bad players for their good ones, and a third-round pick's going to get me this guy, and it's just not real life.
It doesn't work that way. And Kevin Colbert has been one of the best general managers of this era of football when it comes to managing rosters, keeping guys around, building teams. Heck, he's a 2-time Super Bowl champion. There ain't too many general managers who can say that about their career that are in the business right now. So I think people are tripping on that, Wes. And I know you agree because, we've talked about this a lot, and you've been vocal about this a lot on Twitter at Wesley Euler. But on top of all of that, Wes, I look at what the Steelers can still do in this free agency. And I talked about a lot how the excitement over maybe being able to be in the running for a big defensive star like J.C. Jackson. Well, J.C. Jackson's going to the Chargers, or
Chargers
like
are loading up.
Right, the Chargers. Jeez, what did anyone do to you guys, Los Angeles? Come on.
They saw the Rams. They saw what the Rams did, in town, and they were like, "Oh, we got to start collecting some names here. All right, come on."
Yeah, it's just they're throwing names together. They got a pass Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, and now you got J.C. Jackson and Asante Samuel Jr. and Derwin James. My goodness, they're gonna sign Honey Badger next. What else can they do? But point being, the Steelers aren't making those type of moves. And is it disappointing? Totally. You wish that they could have, because they didn't have Ben Roethlisberger's big cap number on them. But this tells me the Steelers have a different plan in place for how they want to build things. And there's been plenty of times in my life, when I was a teenager and I was looking at, why didn't they sign this guy? I used to say the same things when I was a kid, but I grew out of that. Why? Because I studied and I was like, oh, this is just how they move. This is just what they do. And it's successful far more often than it's not.
Yeah, no, and again, that's if you hate that, that's your prerogative, but that's just the way that they're going to operate. It is. It might not be sexy. It might not win the offseason headlines, but is that really what you're interested in? The Chargers are winning the offseason headlines right now. How many playoff games have they won recently?
How many Super Bowls have they won?
How many Super Bowls have they won recently? And hey, and I know a lot of people will say, well, the Steelers only have 3 playoff wins in the last decade, and you're right, and that's an underachievement. But you're fortunate enough, right, to be able to say that that's an underachievement, and it's not because we're the Lions or because we're the Jets or because we're the Browns, right? And I always laugh at that too, when the people that say that, oh, well, Kevin Colbert's lost it. Look at how good these teams were, and you only won 3 playoff games in the last decade. I mean, okay, you realize it's the same thing with Mike Tomlin too, right? Like Mike Tomlin gets a lot of criticism for underachieving in the playoffs. And again, I'm certainly not going to act like it's been all sunshine and rainbows in the postseason and the Steelers haven't lost games that they shouldn't have. That's not what I'm doing here. But these guys are part of the reason that the Steelers' standard is so high, that our expectations are set so high that we haven't been to a Super Bowl in 11 years, 12 years, and we're like pulling our hair out and we're going mad about who the next quarterback is going to be. There's 12 teams in the NFL, Chris, 12 franchises that haven't even won a Super Bowl. And in Pittsburgh, if we don't go to one, if we don't win one every decade, it's like it's a disaster. And that's a good thing. That's the way that you want it, but don't lose the plot. A big part of the reason why we have so high of expectations for the Pittsburgh Steelers every year is because of guys like Kevin Colbert, who Matt Williamson did the math on this. In his Steelers tenure, on average, Kevin Colbert has drafted 24th overall in the first round.
Jeez.
That's been, if you don't include the trade ups, right? Like if you don't include the trade up for Devin Bush and for Santonio Holmes and for Troy Polamalu,
right.
His average selecting position has been 24. And look at what I think if you look at it in that scope, the TJ Watts and the Cam Haywards and all these guys that they've been able to nab in the back half of draft where it really is a crapshoot. And yes, There's the Artie Burnses of the world as well, too, certainly. But every team, every GM in the NFL has that. You know what they don't have? 2 Super Bowls, 1 losing season in 22 years. And in the time that Kevin Colbert has been with the Pittsburgh Steelers, only the Patriots have won more games, and only New England and Baltimore have won more playoff games. So for our standard, it might not be up to snuff, but we've got a pretty damn high standard compared to most around the league, and Kevin Colbert's a big part of that. Have some respect, you heathens.
I agree entirely, and it just reminds me of just all the different things. I'm just like, when people say the Steelers are spoiled, this is what they mean.
Oh, 100. Know it. I've taken heat for this. I've said this ever since Ben Roethlisberger retired. It has not been hard to be a Steeler fan for the last 18 years. It's been very easy. And you might say, "Oh, what do you mean? But the Killer Bee era, and we did this, and we lost to Tim Tebow out at Heinz Field, and what do you mean? There's been so many." It has not been hard to be a Steeler fan for the last 18 years. If 8-8 is a disaster season, go talk to half the other fan bases around the NFL. But that's good. That's what you want from your team. That's a good thing.
Wes, you talked about the Chargers and their playoff success. You don't know how much they have less playoff wins in the last 10 years than the Steelers have. Heck,
the Browns do, the Jets do, all these teams that win the offseason headlines all the time.
Every time, and especially, again, another one in the Jaguars. And I know the Jaguars, they're big winners on this first day. They look at, they're signing this guy, they're signing the Brandon Scherf, this guy, that guy, bang, 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 bang. They're just lighting them up. And I'm sitting here like, how many times have we seen this? How many times have we seen this? And everyone gets really excited about it, and Steelers get envious, like, oh, like only we could have gotten that guy. There's reasons behind these things. And listen, I'm not saying you're not wrong for feeling like frustration because you're like, oh man, I hope that they could have gotten this guy. That's natural. You're a fan. I feel you there. But put it into perspective. And that's what we try to do here on this show. Last thing before we go, Wes, we do got to get out of here quick because we're way over time. But Ahkello Witherspoon was rumored by Aditi Kinkhabwala that he is going to be signed. There was no announcement as of the time of this recording of this show. Do you think that is getting done? And what do you think of that means for Joe Hayden or Terrell Edmunds?
Yeah, that's an interesting kicker. It sounds like Edmunds might be on the way out.
Yeah.
And you and I have discussed, I wouldn't love that. I obviously don't want to pay him huge money either, but I think he meshes well with Minkah Fitzpatrick. And again, in a transition off season like this, I'm trying to have that grocery list as short as possible, right? I'm trying to have those holes that need plugged be as few as possible. I just want a couple items on the grocery list, right? I don't want the CVS receipt style length of off season and draft needs and holes to fill, but it sounds like Edmunds is moving on. I love keeping Witherspoon. I think he played really well in the second half of the season when he started to settle in, when he figured out what was going there. In theory, I would like to keep Joe Hayden, but you need to know what the money is and his age and the years that he wants and all that. But of those 3, Chris, I think you absolutely had to keep one. Just because, again, you don't want to go the rest of this free agency process. And we know how the Steelers work. They never usually go for the high-priced guys early on. They wait their time. They bide their time. They'll nab, Trey Turner later on. They'll grab somebody later on. They'll wait for a Joe Hayden to get cut, and they'll sign him. They'll, a Joe Schobert comes on the market, and they'll trade a Vance McDonald comes on the market late in the preseason, and they'll trade a late pick for a guy like that. That's how the Steelers like to operate. And I do think, though, they want to keep that same thing going on here, obviously. But you had to keep one of those 3 guys, and Witherspoon feels like a smart play. You got some breaking news, though.
Just saw this from Albert Breer. He is now reporting, per his source, the Steelers' deal with Mitchell Trubisky is 2 years, $14 million, far lower than what PFF Sam said it was going to be $15 million a year. You just got Mitchell Trubisky for $7 million. 14 total.
Oh, that's brilliant.
With a base value of $14 million. But okay, as I understand it, a 2-year deal with a base value of $14 million. If I'm reading this correctly, it's saying they're paying what, $7 million a year?
Yeah,
that's a steal. Like for what he was, because they were talking about 10 million, 12 million, 15 million, 14 over 2 years. Steelers, I think you did a good job. Literally, I'm just seeing this now as a recording, so I'm going to check it and make sure. And if I'm incorrect here and I'm reading the wrong thing, then I put it in the notes in the.
It looks like 14 total without incentives. So
without
obviously he's going to have some. You make the playoffs, you start so many games,
right.
You make a Pro Bowl, whatever type incentives. But that, Chris, that gets back to, again, you can still do whatever you want. If
Yep.
if pick 20 rolls around and Malik Willis is there and you want to take him, go for it. If it's next year and you want to go make a big splash, go for it. You know what? It's fun. I'm glad we got this in because I think that's great because best case scenario, Mitch Trubisky is a solid bridge quarterback who gets you to the playoffs and you win some games. Worst case scenario, he's a good number 2. And at $7 million per is a fair price number 2 as well.
Yeah, that's a great price value for what you're bringing him in for. Because again, when you have quarterback not rich off seasons, quarterbacks like Mitch Trubisky can run you a hefty tab. I mean, look at Kirk Cousins and what he milked out of the Vikings. Look at guys over there, Sam Bradford and the contracts he used to get.
Look at the money that Jay Cutler made throughout his career.
So, the list goes on and on of quarterbacks like that. But the Steelers didn't do that with Mitch Trubisky. I think that's a huge win for the Steelers organization to get this guy.
Love it.
And that opens up more space to use this money to get other positions that you need. So, Wes, like I said, we're way over time. I'm glad we got that at the last minute, though. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, at Wesley Euler on Twitter. I host the Steelers Blitz with Arthur Moats on Steelers Nation Radio. You can listen to us live at noon on iHeart and on Steelers.com and through your iHeart app and Steelers mobile app. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Steelers Blitz. And then, if you're a WVU fan as well, myself and Adam Crowley, we host the Ears and Beers podcast, about 2 episodes a week there as well, talking all things Mountaineers. So that's where you can find me, of course, other than, here on the Locked On Steelers podcast with our buddy Chris Cotta.
Absolutely. Wes is the man. Do follow him, Adam Crowler. Everything they do great work. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to it, to our channel, to get all of our content. If you want to help us out, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Give a positive comment with those 5 stars. You get a shout at the end of the show, like this person who says Sybil's Locked On Steelers is 5 stars. Awesome podcast. Definitely gets me through my morning shifts every day. You're the man, Carter. Hashtag Steeler Nation. Dylan from Philly. Dylan, thank you for your 5-star review. You help us out so much. We got one more 5-star review coming up on tomorrow's show as well. Keep adding your reviews to get back on the show. And if you already gave one, give another one. It might get you back up on here. So thanks again for checking us out. No Tony Serino, like I said, this week he's on vacation. I couldn't get to him. His internet connection wasn't great. So we got Adam Bittner from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He'll be on tomorrow. We'll be talking more about the Steelers free agency moves, a little bit more Mitch Trubisky talk right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.